Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Doing that today, was doing that here on late Wednesday when I log onto the internet. And Nick Saban has tested positive for coronavirus. And as I said off the top, first and foremost, I want to make it clear, this is bigger than football. I do hope he's safe. I do hope he is okay. Obviously, anyone who listens to this show knows that I kind of am, I'm not as consumed with worrying about every single case of coronavirus, but it also goes without saying that Nick Saban, being a little bit older, being 68 years old, he is at a higher risk than someone, say, my age, in my early to mid-30s. And so, obviously, look, first and foremost, we hope Coach Saban is okay. And we hope that he's fine, and it sounds like he's fine because, as I said right before I recorded, he did a press conference where it was obviously via Zoom from his house, where he basically said he feels fine, he's asymptomatic, and in true Nick Saban fashion, he said he is coaching from his house. Apparently, he has a video monitor set up at the house so he can watch practice. He has a manager on the phone, and every time he sees something he doesn't like, he gets in the manager's ear to get in the players' ears. They'll run the play over. He'll chew out the players, whatever he's got to do. So it appears as though he will be fine. But this is obviously a monkey wrench in this game. And so I do think it's important before we go forward for me to just say a couple quick things. One, as I'm recording, they are currently in the process of, I guess, doing a second test to confirm the first one with Nick Saban. So there's a possibility that maybe he isn't positive and maybe he will be able to coach on the sidelines Saturday. But as of right now, he will not be in the stadium. Steve Sarkisian, the former Washington and USC head coach, who is now Alabama's offensive coordinator, will be running the show. And finally, it's also worth noting that as of right now, Saban and the AD, Greg Byrne, are the only people that have tested positive in the Alabama football facility. There is, of course, the possibility that more tests come back positive and that the game, in fact, has to be canceled. But as I'm recording right now, 7:30 Eastern time on Wednesday night, Nick Saban will not be in the stadium. Steve Sarkisian will be calling plays, and the game is still on. And so from that context, that is how I'm going to preview the game. On the football side of things, I'll be honest, coming into the game, I actually liked Alabama, and the crazy thing is, you guys know that I have been on Georgia all off season long. I do believe that Georgia has the best defense in college football, especially relative to the competition. I mean, in theory, somebody statistically might be a little bit better, somebody might have better numbers across the board, but they haven't played the level of competition that Georgia has, with both Auburn and Tennessee being ranked in the top 25. My concern with Georgia, though, however, remains the offense. And I think the offense has actually looked good. I think Stetson Bennett, the quarterback, has been a great story across college football this year, literally going from the fifth string spot back 3 or 4 weeks ago. I guess it was probably about 6-8 weeks ago now. But he beat out Jamie Newman, the transfer from Wake Forest, who quit the team. He beat out JT Daniels, the USC transfer. He beat out DeJuan Mathis, who was a highly ranked recruit. And so now he's now the starting quarterback. And I think for the most part, he's been phenomenal. I actually think he's looked really good. I think he's looked better than anyone could have possibly imagined. But if you follow college football, you know that the biggest criticism of Kirby Smart throughout his time at Georgia is that his quarterbacks are somewhat limited and that he kind of puts handcuffs on them. And I think that's coming into play this year. By the way, it's very ironic because he had probably the most dynamic quarterback in college football on his roster in Justin Fields. Justin Fields, of course, transfers to Ohio State. But as it pertains to Kirby Smart, and listen, I've done my Kirby Smart spiel a bunch, And I do think he's really I think he's coaching really well this year, but that has been the issue. The issue has been, does he put too many handcuffs on his quarterbacks? And I think this year he is. Now, maybe in his defense, listen, he's the guy at practice every single day. Stetson Bennett is a former walk-on. And so, yeah, like you're not going to just, it's not going to turn into the Mike Leach air raid when you have a fifth-string quarterback that's a former walk-on. You're not just going to throw the ball all over the field. But I do think that it's going to be a completely different deal playing Georgia or playing Auburn at home and playing Tennessee at home and then going on the road to play Alabama. I just think it's a different deal, right? I kind of talked about it last week with Jarrett Garantano, the Tennessee quarterback. He looked great at home against Missouri. Jeremy Pruitt's aggressive. He's going for it on fourth down. He's doing all this crazy stuff. And I said last week, as I previewed the Georgia-Tennessee game, I said, is Jeremy Pruitt really going to open it up with Jarrett Garantano that way when he's on the road against the top 5 team? And I think it's largely the same thing with Kirby Smart in Georgia. I just don't think he's going to open things up in the biggest game of the season. I think, if anything, he's going to scale things back. And I think we already kind of saw that last week where there was a couple times early in the game, middle of the game, where there's big third downs, big fourth downs, and Kirby Smart either runs the ball, tries to force it down the throat of the defense, or he plays it very conservatively, third and long, either hands the ball off or it's a short pass that doesn't gain. So while Georgia won last week, I think we have to call a spade and say it was because of their defense. Tennessee had a bunch of turnovers late in the game that led to short scoring drives and field goals, and that was why the game is one-sided as it was. Now, that's not to take away from Georgia, because again, I think they're really good, but I also don't think it was they didn't beat Tennessee by 23 points because they completely opened up the offense. They beat Tennessee by 23 points because their defense was phenomenal. Their defense forced turnovers, and eventually Tennessee just wore down from being on the field so much in the second half. And so when I look at that relative to a game against Alabama, I like Alabama. And I know that the big topic of conversation with Alabama is, of course, their defense, the way the defense has played over the last couple games. But I'll be honest, guys, I'm just not as worried as everybody else, right? Like, I understand they gave up 48 points the other day against Ole Miss. I understand that we have never, and I talked about it on Monday's show, we have never seen a Nick Saban coach defense look the way that they did against Ole Miss the other night. But I think that's a direct byproduct of Ole Miss. And I talked about it, and I'm going to keep talking about it. I've talked about it since the first week. But Lane Kiffin knows at Ole Miss the only way he is going to beat teams is to put his foot on the gas, keep putting his foot on the gas, and not let up until the final whistle. He knows that he has the worst defense in the SEC, maybe in all of Power 5 football, and he knows that no lead is safe. You can't take your foot off the gas, and you got to keep scoring. And so because of that, I don't think that Alabama is some incredibly awful defense. I think they faced the most dynamic offense that they are going to face all season when they played Ole Miss last week. I would also add this. On top of everything else, everyone's so focused on how bad Bama's defense looked, everyone's sleeping on how good the offense is. And again, I know part of it is you're playing Ole Miss. Ole Miss is the worst defense probably in the Power 5. Shout out to Kansas. Kansas with Les Miles is probably worse. But Ole Miss is right up there in the short conversation of worst defenses in college football. But when I think about Alabama, everyone is so focused on the defense. We're losing track of how incredible this offense is, right? Like, I think we all thought in theory that Alabama could take a step back with Mac Jones instead of Tua. And that's just not happening. Now, maybe they haven't played very good competition, but I'll tell you this. They beat Texas A&M. Texas A&M is a really good football team, and Alabama put up 52 points against Texas A&M the other day. And so when I look at this team, everyone's so focused on how bad the defense looked against Ole Miss. By the way, I'd add they actually looked pretty good the week before against Texas A&M when Texas A&M was basically held to 2 touchdowns. A&M ended up scoring 24 points, but one of those touchdowns came late. Another one was on a short drive after an interception. But on top of the defense not being as bad as it looked against Ole Miss, everybody's sleeping on the offense. I don't think people understand how good Mac Jones has been this season. Mac Jones, the starting quarterback at Alabama, check this out. First of all, he is completing 79% of his passes, which is just stupid. And I know he hasn't faced a defense like Georgia yet, but 79% of his passes is stupid. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. It is the second best mark in college football, by the way, behind BYU. He is also averaging 13 yards per completion. Again, I know a lot of it was against Ole Miss. But when you average 13 yards per completion over the course of 3 games, that is an incredible stat. And so when you add him in with the running game, when you add him in with Najee Harris, when you add him in with a running back who is averaging almost 7 yards per carry, I just think this offense is awesome. And when I look at the bigger picture of this game, what I see is that I guess the way that I would frame it is that I think Bama's offense will be more successful against Georgia's elite defense than I think Georgia's bad offense will be successful against Alabama's shaky defense. What I do see, what I think is going to happen in this game, and we'll get into the Saban effect in a minute, is that I do think that I think it'll be close early. I think Georgia will provide the toughest defense that Bama will have faced all year. But I'll tell you this, Bama's defense I don't think is as bad as people think, and I think they're going to limit Georgia, especially if Georgia isn't aggressive on offense. So could I see it being close for a half? Yes. Could I see Georgia being up 13-10 at intermission? I could. But I also think when you look at the bigger picture of this game, when you look at the bigger picture of how these teams play, I think Alabama has too much big play capability where after a while it's kind of one of those bend but don't break deals. You bend, you bend, you bend, you bend, you bend, and eventually you snap in half like a twig. And so as good as Georgia's defense is, can they stop Alabama from making those 2, 3, 4 big plays over the course of the game? My answer is I don't really think so. And if they can't, I do like Alabama, and that is why I like Alabama. Now, it's of course important to talk about the Nick Saban effect here because, Nick Saban's probably not going to be on the sidelines for this game. And so I think that's part of it. I will say seeing Nick Saban's press conference late Wednesday made me feel a little bit more confident. He basically said it's business as usual. It's no different than when a player gets injured. We at Alabama don't make excuses when a player gets injured, so I'm not going to let my guys make an excuse when I am not allowed to be in the stadium. I'd also say I'm sure that Nick Saban will probably be on a monitor giving a pregame speech in the locker room before the game, giving a halftime speech in the locker room at halftime. So I don't know that it's going to be that big of a difference. I would actually say the bigger difference is this. How does it affect Steve Sarkisian? Because Steve Sarkisian's used to sitting in the booth, calling plays, just focused on what his offense is doing relative to the other team's defense. Is he going to be able to do that as the quote-unquote de facto head coach of this team? So I will say that when this news first happened, again, assuming this game is played, I did kind of think to myself, like, I'll be honest, this is bad news for Alabama. But the more that I think about it's still obviously bad news for Alabama. But the more that I think about it, the more that I think that this might not have as big of an impact as I thought. And I do still like Alabama because I do think that Nick Saban, his presence will be felt, his presence will be in the stadium, and I do think Alabama will be fine. Really quickly, do want to talk about another couple of the SEC games on the slate. By the way, really bizarrely quiet weekend of college football. And I'll tell you, if we don't get Georgia versus Bama, there ain't too much meat on the college football bone this week. But that is because there is no, by the way, I'm tripping over my words here. There's not much meat on the college football bone. LSU Florida has been canceled. I think most of the Big 12 is off this week, and the Big 10 actually starts next week. So at least we got that going for us. But it's basically ACC football and SEC football, but we're already down 2 SEC games with no Mizzou Vandy, and now we're down a second game without LSU Florida. So safety first, of course, but let's hope that for our entertainment purposes, we do get Bama, Georgia, because there's not much left on the schedule. As far as the other games, listen, I think probably you could make the argument that the biggest, most important game in terms of a team's season, in terms of what is at stake, I think you could say is probably Kentucky-Tennessee. Because when I look at that game, this is what I see. I see two programs that had really high expectations coming into this season, really believed that they had a chance to do something special, and one team is going to be really upset after this game. Kentucky is currently 1-2. We've talked about Kentucky a ton, but they got robbed at Auburn. They lost by 1 point against Ole Miss. But I don't, for a team that is coming off two really successful seasons, including a 10-win season a few years ago, you don't want to fall to 1-3 when you still have Georgia coming next week. You haven't played Florida yet. And by the way, you got Bama put on the schedule this year as well. It could be really, really, really bad if Kentucky does fall to 1-3. And from the Tennessee perspective, it's kind of the same deal. If Tennessee loses this game, they fall to 2-2. They still got Bama. They still got Florida, and they have a crossover game with Texas A&M that wasn't originally scheduled that is now on the schedule. So neither of these teams wants to lose, but I think to me, what's fascinating about this is kind of just what we get from each offense, right? And I kind of talked about Tennessee a minute ago, but the story here is their quarterback. It is Jarrett Garantano. It is this senior that is so hot and cold, so up and down, whatever you want to use. But we just don't know what we're going to get from him, right? Like you look at 2 weeks ago against Missouri. He looks like a senior quarterback. He's poised. He's calling stuff in the pocket. He's doing this. He's doing that. There's no pass rush on him. He's got plenty of time. He looks like freaking Joe Montana back there throwing dimes. Last weekend, not so much. Georgia gets a real pass rush on him. And while I hate to be critical of college kids, I have to call a spade a spade. I have to be honest. And he just looked rushed, and he looked, I don't know if scared's the right word. I don't think he's physically afraid, but made some really dumb plays and had 3 turnovers in the second half. All 3 turnovers led to points for Georgia, 13 points total, and all of a sudden, you're looking at that Georgia game, and you're thinking, oh my God, Georgia dominated Tennessee. They win 44-21, 23-point win. Well, if Garantano doesn't turn the ball over 3 times, you don't give him 13 points, and all of a sudden, it's basically a 10-point game. And so in terms of this game, there's that perspective, but then there's also the Kentucky perspective too. And you want to talk about hot and cold. How about Kentucky? On the one hand, you force 6 turnovers against Mississippi State. 6 turnovers, which is an incredible testament to the defense. They absolutely deserve credit for the success that they had figuring out what the heck that air raid offense was going to do when it came to Kroger Field. But then on the flip side, the offense on the Kentucky side just is not very good, right? Like I know we have a lot of Kentucky fans listening. Some of you were probably at the game. 157 yards of total offense, 73 yards passing. The play calling of Eddie Gran has been a hot topic for basically as long as I've been doing this podcast. It doesn't get any better. And so to me, I just look at it from this perspective. Tennessee's not turning the ball over 6 times. You're not going to have a bunch of short fields like you did last week. And can you generate enough offense to get things going against Tennessee and specifically on the road? My fear is that Kentucky probably can't, and that is why I actually do like Tennessee to win this game. It's one of my best bets. I will get to my bets in a minute. But that's kind of my fear in this game is I just don't think Kentucky can generate enough offense to keep up with Tennessee. Tennessee by no means an offensive juggernaut, but I could see a final score of 20-10, 24-14, something like that with Tennessee winning and covering. All right, transitioning to a couple other quick games, and we'll get to my picks. We'll get to some other topics. Nick Nurse coming up, by the way. Great guest, Nick Nurse. So a couple other games, right? I don't want to spend too much time on them. Ole Miss, Arkansas, fascinating game for me. Obviously, look, Arkansas should be 2-1. We talked about the boneheaded officiating decision in that game. They should be 2-1. And Ole Miss, I think, is kind of in an interesting position as well because they're coming off the Bama loss. They're beat up. And then Lane Kiffin says at his press conference Wednesday, oh, yeah, we got a bunch of COVID cases too. And I think that completely throws a monkey wrench into this game. I think it's hard to kind of figure out, okay, who's like going to be good and who isn't going to be good and all that stuff. It's hard to evaluate what this game is going to look like because of the positive COVID cases. And I obviously think, look, like a lot of it has to do with like who is positive, right? If Matt Corral, the quarterback, is positive, Ole Miss probably ain't winning this game. If it's a couple guys on their defense, they weren't very good anyway. So who knows? But I guess what I would say in terms of this game, my one big picture thought is kind of very simply this, is that I just think that when I look at this game, one thing stands out to me, and it's something that I don't think anybody's really talking about. And what I mean by that is this. There is, I think, a sign of how Vegas thinks this game is going to go. And I try not to do too much gambling off the top because I know not all of you are gamblers. But I think it's important to look in this game at the over-under point spread. And the over-under is the number of total points Vegas expects to be scored in this game. And it started at like 76, 77. It's down a little bit, but it's still at 74, 75. And so why do I bring that up? If you do the math, by the way, a 75 over-under is basically a final score is going to be like 40 to 35. And so why I bring that up as important for this game is because what Vegas is telling me with that over-under is this, is that Ole Miss will have more success exerting its will on Arkansas than the other way around. And what I mean by that is that if you watch these two teams play, and I obviously have, I love college football, I do this show, it's what I do my Fox Sports radio show Saturday night. If you follow college football and you've seen these teams play, very contrasting styles of play. Ole Miss, I've talked about so much, not going to spend much time on it, but score. Our defense stinks. We got to keep scoring. Even if we're up 21 points in the third quarter, we got to keep scoring because our defense could let us down. We could lose this game. Arkansas has kind of been the exact opposite. Their defense has been phenomenal. Their defense has been excellent. And in a positive sign, the offense actually looked pretty good last week against Auburn. And so if you look at how Arkansas wants to win games, they want to win games more in the 28 to 24, 24 to 21 type range, similar to how they beat Mississippi State in week 2. And so I bring that up because to me, it feels like advantage Ole Miss. It feels like Vegas is saying this is going to be a shootout, and I just don't know if Arkansas has enough weapons and enough firepower on this offense to successfully win a game playing that way. Now, it could change with COVID, and it could change just with any number of things. But when I look at this game, I do go advantage Ole Miss just because of the simple fact that Vegas seems to think it's going to be really high scoring. And if it's really high scoring, it is advantage Ole Miss. And Ole Miss is a team that is more comfortable playing that way. I do think that it will probably be the most successful game for Arkansas offensively. But defensively, I think they're going to struggle with Ole Miss because everybody is. I lean Ole Miss in this game. Last little preview game, I'll get to my gambling picks, is this. Texas A&M, Mississippi State. And I'll tell you this right now. This is the biggest stay away of the millennium for me. I would not bet 1 cent. You could give me $100 and tell me go to Vegas and put it down for me. I wouldn't let you spend that money because I just don't think we know what we're going to get from either team. Texas A&M is coming off the biggest win of Jimbo Fisher's tenure, which basically means it's like the biggest win that any of the players have ever had since they got to A&M. We're talking top 5 team in Florida at home. Players go wild. Game-winning field goal. As time expires, everybody rushes the field. They're hugging. They're doing all that. Now they got to go on the road. Now they got to play at Mississippi State, who played about the worst game that they possibly could. They did play the worst game that they possibly could with 6 interceptions. KJ Costello, 2 weeks after setting an SEC passing record, gets benched in the second half for the kid Will Rogers, the backup. And so this is just a perpetual stay away from me. Will not be touching this game with a 10-foot pole.